Hello and welcome everybody to Chapter 8 Safety Training, Protection of Workers. My name is Teresa Drum. I am the statewide safety liaison for the Division of Maintenance. I have 27 years experience with the department, all in the Division of Maintenance. I have worked in District 7, District 11, and now headquarters. The majority of my time had been spent out in the field, about 20 years. Worked my way up from entry-level landscape maintenance worker, maid operator, lead worker, supervisor, superintendent, and I am now currently a maintenance manager 1. So today we're going to go through a lot of material. The objectives, of course, we want to ensure that everybody has the necessary knowledge and proper attitudes to ensure your safety and the safety of others. We want everybody to recognize the hazards associated with your jobs, as well as, most importantly, to prevent injuries and fatalities. So Chapter 8 is from the Maintenance Manual. Many people think it's from the Safety Manual because it primarily deals with safety, but it is a maintenance document. It is part of the Injury and Illness Prevention Program, which of course Cal/OSHA does require us to have a written injury and illness prevention program, and Chapter 8 is just one small portion of that for us. All employees are expected to follow the minimum guidelines contained in Chapter 8 of the Maintenance Manual. Now, we do have the ability to change chapter standards from time to time. It can actually enhance our safety by reducing the standard. One example that can be used is there is a requirement for a 1,500-foot sight distance ahead of the first flashing arrow sign in one of our closures. However, many of us may work in an area where there isn't the adequate sight distance needed, so that may force us to pick an area that satisfies that requirement, but as a result lengthens the closure we have to set. Now, of course, our standard cone trucks only carry enough cones to do a standard closure. I think about 180 cones is what it's rated for, but you know, once you start going to closures that are a mile or more in length, it's just going to be necessary for you to have to stop midway through your closure and have to refill that cone truck. This, of course, puts us in a hazardous position by making us stop midway through our closure. So instead, what we could do is we could have a deviation. Anything that has to deal with traffic control, of course, you have to consult your district traffic engineer. But once you have that approval and in writing at the area superintendent level or higher, it is filed at the region office for 3 years. And in this situation, it could actually enhance our safety by reducing the standard and reducing the requirement for the 1,500-foot sight distance ahead of that first FAS and maybe making it just 1,000. So that would allow us to do just a standard length lane closure as opposed to something that's longer that accommodates that 1,500-foot sight distance. So this is not needed for emergencies. In an emergency, of course, we do what we have to protect life and property. We can always bring things up to standard as time and resources permit. This is also not for general use throughout the district. It is for certain locations. On occasion, that's used for different requirements, as the example was that I mentioned earlier. So Chapter 8 is largely based on the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. In maintenance, of course, not only are we going out and repairing potholes or doing paving, crack sealing, fixing guardrail. We're doing that in addition to temporary traffic control. Most locations require us to do some sort of closure or advance warning prior to us doing the repair. So a lot of what's in Chapter 8 is from the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. We primarily focus on Part 6, which is temporary traffic control. It is published by the Federal Highway Administration, and all states either follow the Federal Department of Transportation's MUTCD, or many states, such as California, has their own. So our California MUTCD is published by our own Division of Traffic Operations. It provides uniformity nationwide, and this uniformity can translate into safety for our workers, primarily because it sets a standard for the motoring public to realize and understand what they need to do when they come into our closures. This is very important nowadays, of course, with the advent of the distracted driver. Distracted driving now is a primary concern, one of the biggest job hazards that face us today. And of course, when I first started, people didn't have all of these cell phones like they do nowadays. Nowadays, they're affordable and portable. Almost everybody has a cell phone, and they like to mess with them while they're driving, of course. And there's laws in place against talking and texting while driving, but there's also laws in place against drinking and driving as well, and people still continue to do that. So it's important for us to remember that we don't have control over what the motorist does, only what we can do to protect ourselves. And of course, one way that we are able to protect ourselves is sharing close calls. So for us, a close call incident is one in which there was no fatality to one of our employees due to legal issues. Of course, we are not to be sharing information when there is a fatality. So a lot of these incidents, although we may consider it a close call because not one of us was a fatal, there may be some kind of motorist involvement that would prevent us from sharing this right away until legal can review it. So, but for the most part, when we have an incident where there wasn't a fatality to one of our employees, we can share that information. It's very important to be able to get the word out about what activity we were performing, the location and time of day, what types of closures there was in place, and briefly what happened. They might not have all the details, of course, until a CHP report is released. But at least in the meantime, we can let other people know what happened, so that way they may be prepared to take similar action if they are also faced with a similar incident. So in this situation here, this slide is showing an incident that occurred in District 8 several years ago. We had a closure in place, and we had a motorist who took his eyes off the road for just a few seconds, claiming it was just to reach down for his cup of coffee. But it was enough time where his eyes were off the road. He ended up in our closure, striking the vehicle here with the hood up. It had a dead battery, actually, and our employee had just finished hooking up the jumper cables to it when it was impacted by this motorist. We did have some employee injuries in this incident, but luckily nothing serious. So we have no control over what the motorist does, only what we can do to protect ourselves. And that goes along with avoiding complacency, as well as advising the motorist of what they need to do. We also want to let the motorist know what's going on. We have signs, cones, flashing arrow signs, and portable changeable message signs that we can use to let the motorist know what's going on. Avoiding the errant driver. You'll hear this over and over, how important it is to face traffic, use lookouts, and plan an escape route. Using protective equipment. Our vehicles are our biggest piece of protective equipment out there. They can be like a rolling barrier for us. And of course, it's important to remember whenever you are in your vehicle, make sure you have your seatbelt on. Even if it's break time, if you're sitting in the right of way, enjoying a sandwich and it's 11:45, don't think that an accident can't happen. Accidents don't keep time. They can happen at any time. So whenever you're in your vehicle, our policy is that you shall have your seatbelts on. And of course, PPE is personal protective equipment. Majority of this is provided from the state warehouses in the districts. There are specialized PPE, of course, that your supervisor may have to purchase. Planning work to reduce exposure is important. We want to keep in mind time of day, time of year. We want to avoid placing any closures in areas where we know there's a stadium and there's a game scheduled, or a concert. Or if it's the holidays and you're working in an area that's close to a mall and traffic is impacted by any closures in the area. Also avoid areas in general that you know have congestion at certain times of the year. Oftentimes we'll have a lot of off-the-road accidents where people are coming upon stopped traffic and they're not expecting it, so they try to veer out of the way to avoid rear-ending the vehicle in front of them, and they end up off into the landscape or in the guardrail. So different activities that we perform, there's 3 types. You're either a moving operation, a short-term, or stationary. Moving operation could be on the shoulder or the travel way. TW, that stands for travel way. So if you're on the shoulder, it's a moving operation. If you're in the live lanes, it's a moving lane closure. So you're moving at lower than prevailing speeds in either a live lane of traffic or on the shoulder. We want to keep on-foot exposure to a minimum. This is primarily because you are not using any cones for delineation. You're just using your vehicles to guide traffic around you. Short-term operation definition is 20 minutes or less at one location. The true definition, as in the MUTCD, is one in which it takes longer to set up the traffic control than to perform the actual work. For the Division of Maintenance, however, we keep that at 20 minutes. 20 minutes or less at one location is considered short-term. You do not need to set out any signs or cones. Anything longer than 20 minutes at one location is considered stationary, and you will be expected to set temporary traffic control. We also have 3 types of protective vehicles. First and foremost, the shadow vehicle. A shadow vehicle, by definition, has to have all these requirements. It has to have the truck-mounted attenuator, the TMA. A Type 2 flashing arrow sign is required on the shadow vehicle. Headrest or high back seat, of course, that is important for guarding against whiplash type injuries. Keep in mind, this vehicle is required in any live lane operation because you are moving at lower than prevailing speeds in a live lane of traffic. You can expect to have some impact at any time. Seatbelt. You must have the lap and shoulder harness. So most of our equipment now is newer. I say that loosely because in maintenance, oftentimes we have vehicles that could be 30 years old. Our shop is very good at maintaining our equipment and keeping it in service for long periods of time. So if you are in a vehicle that is going to be used as a shadow, make sure it has a lap and shoulder harness. A two-way radio, if there's not one mounted in it, you may use a portable. Vehicle mass, 16,100 pounds is the minimum. That, of course, is to accommodate the new TL3, test level 3 attenuators that will be coming into the fleet. We'll be phasing out the single box type, the TL2, and replacing it with the TL3. So that has the dual box style. Scorpion is just one popular brand name manufacturer of that device, but you will start seeing those out in the fleet. Very loose guidance for a shadow vehicle operation. When you're following behind an activity, you don't want to be too close. If you are impacted from behind, you would possibly be shoved into the operation ahead of you that you're trying to protect. If you're too far back, of course, traffic could go around you. If you're going to be a shadow vehicle operator, you will receive on-the-job experience prior to doing this on your own. Here's an example of a vehicle commonly used as a shadow vehicle. This is the cargo body style. You can see it has the flashing arrow sign. It also has the truck-mounted attenuator on it. It's hard to see from the picture, but on the driver's side there is a headrest, but on the passenger side there is not. So this vehicle could not have a passenger in it if you were actively shadowing an operation. Both driver and passenger have to have the same safety requirements. There are some of these vehicles still out there. Several years ago, the Division of Maintenance requested to have more shadow vehicles in the fleet. We had quite a few of these cargo body styles with the arrow board already on them, the flashing arrow sign. So we gave the shop lots of money to purchase more TMAs for us to have them installed on the trucks, but we failed to notice that there was no headrest or high back seat on the driver's side. So these cargo style trucks only have bench seats in them, not bucket seats. So the shop did go back through and place headrests on the driver's side on these vehicles. So if you have a truck out there, make sure if you're going to use it as a shadow, it has a headrest or high back seat at least on the driver's side. You can see from the slide here that the truck-mounted attenuator does a very good job at what it's designed to do, which is absorb the energy of the impact. It protects the motorist, of course, who runs into it. It protects the operator of our shadow vehicle, who is protecting the operator of the equipment that typically you might be shadowing in an operation. In this incident, which occurred several years ago in District 5, it was a mowing operation. The mower was primarily on the shoulder, but sticking out a little bit. It was a 4-lane highway, so the shadow truck took the number 2 lane to provide adequate protection for the mower. We had a motorist coming along not paying attention, smack right into the back of the TMA there. So no injuries, and very easy to replace the TMA. Of course, not timely. It takes a while to purchase these sort of things in state government, but it is easily replaced, and people cannot be. The second type of protective vehicles that we have is a barrier vehicle. And the primary difference between a shadow and a barrier is any vehicle can be used as a barrier, and it is unoccupied. Of course, the heavier the better. We have the same loose guidance, not too close, not too far. Once again, it's going to come with experience. You'll be provided that experience as a operator in maintenance. But oftentimes we're going out by ourselves and we're using our vehicle as a barrier. So you don't want it to be rolling over you if it's struck, and not too far back where it provides no cover at all. So we want to have an adequate barrier. You want to make sure it's put in park with the brake set. Lower any attachments to the ground. So if you have a 4-yard with a plow on it, make sure you lower that plow to the ground before exiting the vehicle. You'll see here it says without a TMA and with a TMA. So very important to remember that a shadow vehicle can be a barrier, but a barrier cannot be a shadow. And that is because a barrier vehicle is unoccupied. So without a TMA, you have a variety of parking options available to you, basically whatever you have room for. With a TMA, should be parked parallel with traffic. So let's say you're in a shadow vehicle. By definition, you are shadowing the cone truck, placing a closure. The closure is set. You park your shadow vehicle and now exit the shadow vehicle. It's unoccupied, so it is now a barrier. So it does state that it should be parked parallel with traffic. The reason for that is because the TMA is designed to take an impact at the rear. However, it has performed well in sideswipe incidents. It's also a should, not a shall. Should gives us some flexibility, and for very good reason, because in maintenance we have a much smaller fleet than we used to. We've been through several fleet reductions over the decades, and we're probably at a third of what we used to be. So when we're out there, oftentimes we only have one shadow vehicle available to us. It's a larger vehicle. And let's just say you have a lane closure, and within that lane closure you have an off-ramp shut down, a 2-lane off-ramp. And at the bottom of that off-ramp you have employees on foot. Let's say they're re-stenciling the crosswalk. You want to make sure that no vehicle can get through that closure and down that ramp. You want to protect your people on foot. The best vehicle you have to block that ramp, of course, is your shadow vehicle with the TMA deployed in the down position. And if it is parked diagonally across that ramp, it gives you very good coverage to block those lanes to ensure nobody can get through. So we do have that flexibility, and with good reason, because once again, we need to protect our workers on foot. So when you do park your vehicle, you want to keep this in mind, and these questions come up time and time again. Which way do I turn my wheels? So it's in writing in Chapter 8 under the barrier vehicle heading for protective vehicles. Wheels shall be turned away from the work zone and away from traffic if possible. But first and foremost, wheels shall be turned away from the work zone. We want to protect our people on foot. So if you're parked on the shoulder, you're by yourself, you're off over on the shoulder area, the unimproved shoulder, let's say, you're not working behind guardrail. You use your vehicle as a barrier. You want to keep your wheels straight ahead, because if it is impacted, it may roll ahead a little bit, but you don't want to turn your wheels to the right because you're over there off onto the right shoulder. So you can just keep your wheels straight ahead. However, if you are out with a crew and there's a whole bunch of people over in the landscape, let's say, maybe cutting trees or dragging brush to a chipper, and your vehicle is parked on the shoulder behind the chipper and acting as a barrier for those folks, you can't turn your wheels to the right because everybody's over there off in the landscape area. And keep in mind, in this scenario, there's no guardrails, so nothing to protect anybody. You're using your vehicle as a barrier, so you can't turn your wheels to the right. You can't have them straight ahead, because if it's struck, it'll roll into the people who are loading the chipper. So your only choice then is to turn your wheels towards traffic. Now, of course, in this scenario, yes, if your vehicle is impacted, it possibly will roll into traffic and motorists may hit it. But they are in a vehicle, they're protected, and they supposedly should have their seatbelts on. And we are not. We are out exposed on foot. We need that lead time to be able to enact our escape route and get behind something for protection. So we still have the ability to do this. Just remember, wheels shall always be turned away from the work zone. Here's a great example of what could be used as a barrier vehicle. It's definitely a heavy vehicle, but not all of us have one of these available to us. So once again, you use what you have. Something is better than nothing. Once again, this is a true close call incident for us. We can learn from this. We didn't have a fatality. It's an activity that we perform very often. But you look, and where is your escape route? We don't really have much of an escape route in this scenario. Be very cautious when you're working in areas such as this that you have limited or no escape routes. You want to use resources available to you. Use traffic brakes. CHP traffic brakes are not just limited to items in lanes. They're also designed to be used in locations where you have limited or no escape routes, such as this. Let's say you're performing this activity in front of a sweeper. There may be a shadow vehicle behind the sweeper that you could radio to and ask them to take the lane. Have them take that lane adjacent to you. That provides more buffer space for you. However, maybe there could also be a time of day where you know that traffic starts to slow down in this direction. Maybe afternoon commute. Maybe wait till then to pick up the large item. Just remember this. If an item is not in the lanes, it's not a hazard to traffic. So items that are on the shoulder or in gore points, they are not a hazard to traffic. So take the time to plan your work safely. Here is another incident that occurred. This was in District 3. We had an employee who noticed that there was some motorists pulled over on the shoulder. Their mattresses were about to come out of their truck, so they pulled over to secure them. Our employee decided to pull over and give assistance. Before he exited his vehicle, he did turn his wheels towards the right. You can see from the picture there's some guardrail there, so if he was going to be off into the unimproved shoulder area, the vehicle would be shoved into the guardrail if it was impacted. So perfectly fine in this scenario to turn your wheels to the right. He let the motorist know to come away from the fog line. They were standing there next to the edge of the travelway there, and offered assistance. Seconds later, a semi-truck, the driver had fallen asleep. He was driving on the shoulder, woke up just in time to see our vehicle parked there, our Caltrans utility body. He veered out of the way, still made contact with our vehicle, as you can see from the picture here, but bounced off it around the motorists with the mattresses, and he's parked down there ahead on the shoulder. Now, more than likely, our employee saved these motorists' lives by stopping to give assistance. The semi would have smacked right into the back of their truck where they had been standing just seconds prior. So the reason for the slide is twofold. Number one, once again, showing the importance of a properly parked barrier vehicle and turning your wheels, the direction to turn your wheels. But also, is it our responsibility to provide assistance to motorists? No, it is not. We are not required to do so. It's not part of our duties. However, most people do want to offer assistance. This can be done by simply contacting dispatch, radio in the information to dispatch or the TMC to let them know that there's a disabled motorist that may need assistance. Or if you are going to stop, policy is prior to getting out of your vehicle, you need to contact dispatch or TMC or somebody. Somebody has to know your location and the description of the vehicle that you're going to be assisting the motorist with, license plate, and also to have CHP en route. Now, the reason for this is we've had several incidents where we stopped to give assistance and things didn't go exactly as planned. In one situation, during a storm event, it was snowing, there was a motorist who was partially blocking lanes, stuck in the snow. We had a snow plow driver stop to get out and see if he could offer assistance. Somehow, long story short, the motorist was under the influence of something and ended up stealing our plow truck. And prior to being apprehended, had come into contact with several other Caltrans and CHP vehicles. Before that occurred, motorists passing by had seen the motorist that was blocking the lanes and had called it into CHP. So luckily, our operator who had his plow truck stolen was not exposed in the elements too long. Luckily, a CHP unit came by and was able to rescue our employee. Another situation was a couple of employees had stopped to give assistance to a motorist who seemingly was passed out behind the wheel, parked on the shoulder. When approached, he actually ended up charging after our employees with a hammer, trying to strike them. Luckily, they were able to get out of the way. They got into their vehicle safely and were able to call for assistance. So as you can see, in both of these situations, we could have had it go terribly wrong for us. Luckily, our employees were not harmed in these situations, and we want to make sure we prevent anything like that happening in the future. So that's why we have the policy. If you're going to stop and give assistance, please make sure that you contact dispatch or TMC, somebody, to let them know where you are and the description of the vehicle. All right, protective vehicles. The third type that we have is the advanced warning vehicle. It's parked upstream from the work zone. It has an FAS or a CMS on it, but it could just have a amber light going. A rotating amber light or a flashing amber light. You may have a sign on your tailgate that says mower ahead or sweeper ahead. But it is parked upstream from the work zone. It alerts motorists of work up ahead. The main thing for you to remember here is if it encroaches upon the travelway, it must be equipped as a shadow vehicle. So once you leave the protection of that shoulder and you're moving at lower than prevailing speeds, which you often will be doing when you are in these types of activities, you need to be in a vehicle that's designed to take an impact, and that is a shadow vehicle by definition. So many districts now have these vehicles as advanced warning vehicles. It makes a fine advanced warning vehicle. However, it's not designed to take an impact, so you don't want to be creeping along at 25 miles an hour in the number one lane. You're just asking to be hit, and this does not offer all the same protection as a shadow vehicle would. So these advanced warning vehicles are fine for use on the right shoulder, center median, pullouts or turnouts. If you're working in an area where you do not have a shoulder to be parked on, turnouts, pullouts, or medians. Oftentimes, our striping crews, they're moving along at a pretty decent clip. Definitely lower than prevailing speeds, however, but they're covering some distance each day, miles and miles and miles. So oftentimes you'll see our advanced warning vehicles in many areas in these types of operations. The advanced warning vehicle is actually a shadow by definition. It looks like a shadow vehicle, although it may not be shadowing anything directly ahead of it. The operation may be a quarter mile ahead. So just important to remember, this type of vehicle for an advanced warning vehicle is fine, but once you encroach upon the travelway, it has to be a shadow type vehicle. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the MAZEEP and COZEEP programs that we have, and I'm not going to actually discuss COZEEP. That's a division of construction. I am primarily concerned with MAZEEP, the Maintenance Zone Enhanced Enforcement Program. Ours runs a little bit different than COZEEP. Ours is an interagency service agreement. So we have an agreement with the California Highway Patrol. It's put together here out of headquarters. My office actually oversees this program. It's a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract, and it has recently been renewed, let's see, in 2015, so we still have till 2018 for the current MAZEEP until we have to renew it. It provides officers out on our job sites, and it's not restricted to any type of activity. It can be used for stationary closures, moving closures, night work, or any locations, once again, where there are limited or no escape routes. You can use MAZEEP if you're going to be doing this all day. The other scenario that I talked about earlier was once in a while, we can contact CHP for traffic breaks. That is different than MAZEEP, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So the only requirements for us to use MAZEEP is a full freeway closure that's planned, which in maintenance we rarely do, or if we're closing half the available lanes at night. MAZEEP is required in those two situations. All the other situations, it's at the discretion of the supervisor. There's one pot of money, and all districts can have allocations, are able to dip into that money. So we do monitor it on a quarterly basis to ensure that we're not running out of funds. Working or moving traffic, very important to be aware when working on the shoulder. Most DOT fatalities nationwide occur on the right shoulder. So you want to make sure you use all barriers available to you. Equipment, guardrail, trees, rocks. Wherever you're working, look what's available to you to get behind in a hurry if you have an errant motorist coming into your work zone. Face traffic. If you're not able to continuously face traffic, you may want to be looking at using lookouts. We'll talk about that too. Avoid crowding of workers. We don't want to be bumping into each other when we're trying to enact an escape route. We also don't want to cause a distraction to the motoring public. We need to make sure that they keep their eyes on the road. Short duration work in gore areas require a shadow or a barrier vehicle and a lookout. So what is meant by a gore area? So these areas in red, we have the triangular piece of real estate there that divides between the travelway, the main line, and the connector, the ramp. So we have the gores on and off ramps. And so the area in red, the triangular area, you have the area that's paved. And then further back from that, it could be landscape, hardscape, there could be mulch or dirt, there could be rocks, stamped concrete, whatever. As long as there's nothing to prevent people from cutting through there, they will. So if you are standing in this location, you have to be aware that traffic could cut through there. So the right shoulders adjacent to and directly across from the gore are also included in the gore area policy. So we don't want you to park on the right shoulder here on this on-ramp and walk across into the gore. We require that your vehicle, a shadow or a barrier, be there with you wherever you're working to provide protection. Once again, you need to have somebody with you as a lookout. If you are unable to get another person as a lookout, if you're by yourself, then you can call for a traffic break. In this situation, I would recommend having 2 officers, 1 to hold traffic on the ramp and 1 to hold traffic on the main line. If you have 0 traffic coming at you, you have reduced the hazard tremendously. Most of us associate the hazard with the off-ramp gore, and rightfully so. People are cutting across there last minute, typically at a high rate of speed. So once again, same policy applies. The areas in red. So the gore, any adjacent shoulders and shoulders directly across from the gore are included in the policy. So any of those areas, you need to have a barrier or a shadow vehicle for protection and a lookout. Once again, if you're by yourself, you can use the CHP traffic brake. Have 0 traffic coming at you. Once again, I remind you that any items that are in the gore, bumpers, tire carcasses, 1032s, they're not a hazard to traffic. So take the time to plan your job safely. They can wait. You can request a CHP traffic break and wait till they arrive prior to exiting your vehicle. These exit signs in the gores, of course, those are the most highly stocked item in our warehouses. They are constantly hit. In the future, there have been plans to now move those further back into the landscaped areas or areas behind guardrail, areas where they're less likely to be hit, so that way it is less likely for our people to have to be exposed in those paved gore areas. But keep in mind, once again, any location where traffic can cut through, even if there's low-growing landscape in there. For those of you in landscape, you know what I'm talking about. You come in on Monday after a weekend holiday associated with drinking, like Cinco de Mayo, Super Bowl, or St. Patrick's Day. You can see all the destruction in your area. You got geysers coming on when you turn on the irrigation. Cabinets are hit. So obviously not an area you want to be hanging out in too long unless you have some means of protection in place. So that's why we have that policy. Anytime you go into this gore area, you have to have a barrier or shadow vehicle with you and a lookout. The right shoulder across from there is part of this because oftentimes when people cut across, they lose control of their vehicle and they end up over in that right shoulder area. So if there's guardrail, they usually hit that, and there's a debris field of glass, license plates, and bumpers. So keep your eye out for that when you're out in your areas, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So actual pictures of the gores. You can see what I'm talking about here. In this particular slide, there's that roll gutter. Most people aren't going to see that when they're exiting the number 1 lane at 80 miles an hour. They're going to hit that and roll it or become airborne and end up over there on the right shoulder in that maintenance vehicle pullout. So that's why that's part of the policy. The right shoulder directly across from the gore. You need to have a barrier or a shadow vehicle and a lookout. If you're just going in there for a short amount of time, then I highly encourage you to use a CHP traffic brake. If you're going to be doing this sort of thing all day, As an example, going into the different gores and peeling off those posters off of our signposts. I highly recommend that your supervisor secure an officer for the day, so using Mazeep. That way they can be with you all day running traffic breaks. All right, another example of a gore area. So facing traffic, very important. And as far as this slide goes, we want to be looking at what constitutes an escape route. Your escape route is going to be changing throughout the day. You want to be looking at the most direct route to get behind some kind of barrier as protection. You don't want to have to be jumping over things or going around things unnecessarily. So keep that in mind. Always be looking for a place to get behind, to go. If you hear squealing brakes or someone's blowing a horn or yelling to look out. And just as a general reminder, I like to include this in all of my training programs, but lateral support, very important. As a general rule, we want to add support whenever the shoulder, the dirt area there, has reduced to half the pavement thickness. So typically 2-inch drop off, our pavement is about 4-inch. Once again, general, it's going to change in different locations, but very important that we be mindful of lateral support, both for the motoring public as well as ourselves. We're actually accessing the shoulder quite a bit in our line of work, so be aware of that when you're, leaving the travel way, slowing down to move on to the dirt shoulder. Watch out for that drop off, lateral support. So if you see something that needs to be addressed, you might want to contact the local supervisor to advise them of the area and location that they might want to take a look at. So speaking of that, so oftentimes we're pulling off onto the shoulder to drop our signs. So our signs are placed in advance of our lane and shoulder closures. They are placed on a sign standard with the bottom of the sign panel a minimum of 1 foot above pavement. We place 2 or more orange flags on each advance warning sign, and the idea with that is to get people's attention. So it's an attention getter. The flag's flapping there in the wind, so it's one of our desperate attempts to get people to pay attention to our signs. So those are required, 2 or more flags, orange flags, on each advance warning sign. That's an MUTCD requirement. It's also a requirement that we place a cone next to each sign. A shadow vehicle should be used for setting and retrieving signs on the shoulder. However, shadow vehicles are not required on any shoulder operations, with the exception of herbicide application, in which a person is in a basket attached to the front of a vehicle. Then a shadow vehicle is required to follow behind that vehicle. That's the only exception, and that's in our Code of Safe Operating Practices for maintenance. But as a general rule, shadow vehicles are not required for shoulder operations. So when you're placing signs on the shoulder, it's not required that you have a shadow. However, a shadow vehicle shall be used for setting and retrieving signs in taper and tangent sections. So what that means, that's just fancy lingo for saying anytime you are going to be setting a lane closure, a shadow vehicle shall be used. So anytime you're moving at lower than prevailing speeds in a live lane of traffic, be it a moving lane closure, setting a lane closure, or picking up a lane closure, a shadow vehicle shall be used. All right, flagging operations. So anytime two-way traffic must share the same lane because of work in the other lane, we're going to set up a flagging operation. So flaggers shall have on-the-job training before going on duty. That's OJT, is on-the-job training. it's required that it be documented. And what you must cover is the equipment used in flagging. So you have signs, your PPE, cones, radios. You have the layout of the work zone you have to be familiar with. So looking at your standard plan, T13, and how you fit into that closure. Signaling methods for stop, proceed, and slow down must be discussed and demonstrated with the employee prior to them going on duty as a flagger. Emergency vehicles and situations, what to do if. So if you hear sirens coming, or if there is a vehicle that rear ends the last vehicle in the queue, you need to know what to do and take action. And then, unfortunately, also methods of dealing with hostile drivers. So those 5 points shall be discussed as part of the training. California does not require flaggers be certified. However, Caltrans does offer certification classes sponsored by the Division of Construction. So you or someone you know may have had that class and actually have a card showing that they are a certified flagger. It's not required. The only thing that's required is OJT, so it must be documented that your supervisor or trainer discussed with you all these bullets that I talked about, and also paired you up with a seasoned flagger to show you how to do flagging. So all of this is provided in Chapter 8 of the Maintenance Manual. It's also in the Flagger Instruction Handbook, and it's also in the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. So it's all the same information, regardless of where you pull it from. That is where you will find that information. All right. This is an incident that occurred in District 6. This is showing the importance of having that OJT. So this was a one-way traffic control, a flagging operation. We had a motorist not paying attention smack into the last vehicle in the queue, which was that cement truck, shoving it forward several feet and then overturning over there on the shoulder. You can see in the slide there over on the right in front of the CHP truck, that flatbed truck actually struck the concrete truck and overturned on the shoulder, and of course barely missed hitting our flagger at the time. So luckily the flagger saw what was happening and was able to take evasive action and get out of the way. All right, so shoulder closures are required if you're going to be stationary at one location for more than 20 minutes and you're on a multi-lane highway with a paved shoulder 8 feet or wider. It used to say, and within 6 feet of a traffic lane, but that part no longer applies. So it's those 3 bullets that require you to set a shoulder closure. The reason why it's important to note the 8 feet or wider on a paved shoulder is that that number and wider, so 8 feet and above paved, more likely that people are going to jump on that shoulder and use it as a lane. So I'm sure you've all seen that. So that's why anytime you're going to be there for longer than 20 minutes, you're going to be required to set that shoulder closure for those reasons. It's optional, however, if you're there for less than 20 minutes, you're on a 2-lane highway, or you're working on an unpaved shoulder. Moving lane closures. Anytime you are engaged in a moving lane closure, a pre-job meeting shall be held. So even if you're doing the same job every day for 2 weeks, you're going to need to have that pre-job meeting every morning. All right. First vehicle approached by a motorist in a lane shall be a shadow. So the shadow truck is the last vehicle in your train, and that's the last vehicle in the live lane. So the first vehicle approached by a motorist in a lane shall be a shadow. We used to like to stick the CHP there when we're using them in these moving lane closures. However, they were getting hit too. So they need to either be on the shoulder closest to the lane that you're in, or they can be tucked in your closure in front of the shadow vehicle so they have protection. Oftentimes I've heard of crews using two very effectively. So there's one on the shoulder ahead of the operation, getting people to pay attention and slow down. And then there's also an officer tucked in their moving lane closure, keeping people honest as they drive through our work zone. So getting them to hang up their phone, slow down, and pay attention. Standard plans T15 through T17 in the back of Chapter 8 cover moving lane closures. And there's a few examples. Sweeping striping, raised pavement, marker replacement. Those are just some examples, not limited to those, but the most common ones performed by maintenance. So as you can see here, this incident occurred in District 10 several years ago. It was a moving lane closure. They were striping. The advance warning vehicle saw a semi pass by at a high rate of speed. He was not slowing down or changing lanes. So the advance warning vehicle radioed ahead to the operation to let him know what was going on. They picked up speed to try and get away from the semi. They were unable to. They were impacted. The semi truck driver had fallen asleep. That's why he wasn't slowing down or changing lanes. So it was a full impact at 65 miles an hour. Luckily, nobody was killed in this incident. You can see that the truck mounted attenuator did its job. It was completely totaled and smashed up underneath the bed of that nurse truck there. The truck was totaled. You can see heavy damage, but still a success story because equipment can be replaced and people cannot. So that's why we have that pre-job meeting. Very important that you discuss this every morning. The reason for that, of course, is oftentimes your job changes day to day. Your supervisor might rotate your responsibilities. One day you're the sweeper, let's say. The next day you're the shadow. The next day you're the advance warning vehicle, and so on. Everybody needs to be on the same page. You're guiding traffic around you using only your vehicles. So very important. You might also be borrowing people, so they need to be on board and know what to expect and what their roles and responsibilities are. So as you can see, this result, highly effective. The team, the crew worked as a team, had their plans in place, and everybody went home. So what this is talking about here is we can take 2 feet of a lane without closing it as long as we don't reduce the width of that lane to less than 10 feet. So if we're going to do that, you need to set a taper that's placed at least 300 feet upstream from the work area. You can refer to Table 1 and revise Standard Plan T9 for taper length and cone spacing if you are going to use this. So this is highly effective for crews who aren't always set up to close lanes, like landscape crews, electrical crews. They might be on the shoulder and need a little bit more space there for their work area, so they can kick those cones out 2 feet into the adjacent lane without having to close that lane. The lane of a 2-lane highway shall be closed if work reduces the width of a lane to less than 10 feet. So in maintenance, once again, we use flagging as our method of traffic control in a 2-lane highway situation. The main thing to remember, traffic shall not be moved across the center stripe without a lane closure or other means of traffic control in place. So for us, we use flagging operations in this situation. We don't want to be causing any head-on collisions. A space of 6 feet should be maintained between moving traffic and the work area. That's a should, not a shall. It's nice to have, but not always feasible. So oftentimes when we're grinding and paving, we're taking up almost the full width there of that lane. We don't have any room to spare as a buffer, a longitudinal buffer between moving traffic and the work area. So keep that in mind. Very important to be watchful of that. Try to face traffic or use the lookouts. A barrier or shadow vehicle shall be used for installation of signs on the shoulder. Once again, it says that throughout the chapter many times to remind you. So on the shoulder, a shadow vehicle is not required, but you have to use one or the other. So a barrier or a shadow. You just can't be dropped off with a stack of cones and a sign and picked up later. You need to have a barrier or a shadow. Shadow vehicles shall be used for installation and retrieval of signs and cones in the taper and tangent sections of the lane closure. So once again, I'll remind you, live lane operations, so setting a lane closure, picking up a lane closure, or in a moving lane closure, a shadow vehicle shall be used. Standard plans T10 and T11 in the back of Chapter 8 covers freeways and expressways, T10, and multi-lane conventional highways, T11. So the main differences between the T10 and T11, of course, we want to be looking at the speed, approach speeds. T11 is obviously, when you look at it, a much simpler closure to place. However, anytime traffic speeds are going to be over 50 miles an hour, you are going to have to go to a T10. So be mindful of that. So T10 freeways, no crossings at grade on a freeway. So anytime you're going to access a business or a residence, you need to take an off-ramp to get there. T10s are also used for expressways. Expressways are higher speed city streets or boulevards that connect cities and counties. They were there before a freeway commonly, and we of course installed a freeway for them, and the city does not want to take the expressway back because we've done such a great job of maintaining it. So through an agreement, they pay us annually typically to continue maintaining it. So it does have a highway shield on it. It's a route that we maintain. It does have crossings at grade, usually regulated by traffic signals. So T10 closures are used for freeways and expressways. And a T11 is for multi-lane conventional highways, unless the speed limit is over 50. Then you must use the T10. So once you've got that figured out, what type of lane closure you're going to be installing, then you got to manage your queuing. So queuing occurs when traffic starts to slow down and starts to build up through our work zone. It's either something that we have created because of our closure, or it could have been something that happened ahead of our closure that had nothing to do with us. In any regard, the traffic is starting to slow down through our work zone. We have created a time and place, time of day and location where people are not expecting there to be traffic stopped. So oftentimes you'll find there'll be a lot of rear end incidents that occur, or they try to avoid that and they run off into our shoulder areas, or worse, into our work zone. So we need to take action if queuing occurs. You have some options available to you. If it's early enough in the day, perhaps you need to reset that closure and stretch it out. Of course, that does waste a lot of time and increase exposure. If it's towards the end of the day, you're starting to have an early commute, well, it might just be time to pick up that closure and finish another day. You can also set some advance warning signs ahead of the queuing. So in one direction, you will be having 6 advance warning signs or more. So that allows people to know that something's going on up ahead. The best course of action that you can take is to use a portable changeable message sign. Some districts, maintenance divisions have their own advance warning vehicles, as I had showed as an example earlier in the program with the portable changeable message sign on it. Other districts have to reserve one through their traffic management team or traffic management center. In any case, you need to take some sort of action to alleviate queuing, or at least to reduce the incidence of any type of rear end incidents that could be occurring. So we want to avoid that. If you do not take any sort of action, CHP could roll up and shut you down, or the TMC will contact you and have you remove your closure. If this happens, of course, the next time we want to go out there and close something during the day, during the week, when we're typically working, we're going to be denied that possibility. So that forces us more into evening, night work, or weekend work, which is fine if there's overtime, but oftentimes you'll find that you have already used up all your overtime because you had a robust winter. So now it's on to short shift changes, and nobody likes those. So we need to be good stewards of the queue. We need to take some sort of action. If there's any kind of significant delay, or if there's a chance for rear end incidents to occur because we've created a queue, we need to take action. Amber lights are used to alert motorists of work near the travelway. However, they can be used on specialized equipment operated on the travelway at lower than prevailing speeds. So if you're in a moving lane closure, you're going to be using your amber lights. If you are performing any kind of storm maintenance, snow removal on the travelway, clearing slides with the loader, you can have your amber lights on. It's not to be used while driving at prevailing speeds. I think most of us are aware of that. Just we sometimes forget. Not to be used when parked in a closure. So as a general rule, we want to avoid overusing the amber lights. It's one of our last defenses to get people to pay attention. That amber light, especially the new LEDs, they're very bright, very good at getting people's attention. So let's not overuse it. So when you're parked in an established closure, you already have signs and cones to alert the motorists of the work zone. However, if you are short duration operation on the shoulders or in the median, you want to be using that amber light. Not to be used with an FAS, flashing arrow sign. Once again, as a general rule, we want to avoid that, especially if your rotating amber is right next to your flashing arrow sign. They will drown each other out. So in some circumstances, you could use it, especially if the FAS is over the cab and then you have flashing ambers on the tailgate. It's not really going to cause too much interference. So if you're going to run both, you might want to just have someone take a look if there's anybody behind you that can radio and let you know how it looks. Same with the flashing arrow sign. We don't want to be overusing that either. So the arrow is used only when you're requiring the motorist to change lanes. So you don't want to have your arrow on once you're parked in an established lane closure, unless you are using that vehicle as an FAS. And we will talk about that in a minute. So we have two types of FAS. Type 1 is trailer mounted, and type 2 is vehicle mounted. Sequential may now be used. It is allowed. Check with your local management to see what their take is on the use of the arrow. They may want to stick to flash, but we are allowed to use sequential. Now, the MUTCD requires that any FAS being used is able to flash as well as sequence. So all of our equipment is able to do that. A portable changeable message sign may also be used now instead of an FAS. All the new PCMS have the arrow message as a display. It could flash and sequence. Placing the flash and arrow sign is placed on the shoulder at the beginning of the taper. If you don't have a shoulder, then you park it as close to the beginning of the taper as possible. And there's that minimum 1,500 foot sight distance for vehicles approaching the first flashing arrow sign. It's very important. We want to try and give them as much time as possible to see that arrow and start taking action. We don't want to wait for them to wait to the last minute to merge over and knock out all the cones in our taper. Oftentimes when you're checking your closure, you'll find that most of your cones are usually down in the taper area. That's why we don't work in our taper. We have the taper, we have buffer space, then the work area. So if you notice that on the T10 and T11 standard plans, it does show the buffer space there, and there's the formula for it on the T9 standard plan. Whenever we set a closure, one person is designated as being in charge of that closure. Typically it's your lead worker or whoever set the closure, maybe the veteran operator. So you should be checking that typically about once an hour. Just drive the entire closure to check for any cones or signs down. Make sure your FAS and your PCMS are functioning properly. In multi-lane closures on freeways and expressways, you need to have one flashing arrow sign for each lane closed. So if you're closing 2 lanes, you need to have 2 flashing arrow signs. The first shall be a type 1, which is trailer mounted. Second and succeeding flashing arrow sign may be a type 1 or 2. So we still do have the ability to use a truck mounted flashing arrow sign in our closures and use it as a stationary FAS. If you use a truck mounted FAS, when you park it there, it cannot be removed until the lane closure is picked up. So as long as that lane is closed, the truck must stay there. You can't use it at lunch to make a burger run. You need to leave it there the entire time. In an emergency, of course, you may use a truck mounted FAS as your first if you have an emergency, and then bring it up to standard when resources permit. So if you have a trailer mounted FAS that goes down, you can use a truck mounted FAS until you get another trailer mounted FAS out there. Working equipment against traffic is allowed. It's permitted on the shoulder or in a lane closure. It may provide added protection if work must be performed at the rear of the vehicle. I see this commonly done in crack sealing operations where the truck hauling the trailer, the kettle, is turned around facing traffic, so that way the employees on foot working at the rear of the kettle with the wand and the squeegee are able to now face traffic. When you do this, make sure the headlights are on during the day and off when working at night. We don't want to blind oncoming traffic. If you have daytime running lights, then you're going to have to refer to your operator's manual or your local mechanic or Google and find out how to get that to turn off at night. So working on opposite sides. As a general rule, we do not work on opposite sides of a highway directly across from each other unless there is a median barrier or traffic is controlled with flaggers or signals. So we used to be okay if it was a moving operation, but no longer recommend this because there was a lot of close calls where we had traffic being channeled into each other. So as an example, we have a crew set up on the right side, let's say the right side of the freeway. They have the number 4 lane taken. They're kicking traffic over with their FAS over to the left. And then you have a sweeping operation, sweeping the HOV lanes. So you have a shadow vehicle with its FAS kicking traffic over to the right. So then you can see the potential for an incident in that kind of situation. So what we now suggest is for the operator in the lead vehicle that can see up ahead what kind of impact you may have on other operations around you. If you see something going on up ahead, a stationary operation, you want to pick up before that and then deadhead through that area and then start your operation on the other side. You can just get the area in between later. We don't want to be causing any kind of incidents, anything that may have a negative impact on other operations around us. So as a general rule, a distance of 2,000 feet must be kept between operations working on opposite sides of the highway. In the same direction of travel, you can never work directly across from each other unless there happens to be some kind of barrier that divides the same direction of travel. So if you're northbound on the right side, you cannot have, if you see a closure on the right side northbound and you wanted to set up northbound on the median, you're not going to be able to do that because you're directly across from an operation and there's nothing to divide the two crews. So here's an example of a situation. We had a moving lane closure. It was the sweeping operation. There is a further back from this, let's see, upstream from that, the right shoulder was very narrow. So the shadow vehicle there on the right shoulder was actually taking that number 4 lane, kicking traffic around them. And you can see this connector here, Magnolia Avenue to the 91 East, was open. And obviously traffic was trying to access that connector, so they had been going around the sweeping operation and going onto that connector. But as you can see there in the gore, there is a crew set up. So they have a closure. They closed off that gore. It's recommended that whenever you're going to work in those types of areas that you shut down the ramp. But my guess is they were not able to get an approval on that closure because it is in that district very difficult to be closing ramps or connectors during the day, during the week. So my guess is they wanted to get the work done and they were limited to just a gore closure, which is fine. However, you can see in that closure, they have the double arrow. Now you're only using the arrow if you're requiring the motorist to change lanes. Because they are not occupying a live lane, they're in the gore, they did not need to have the double arrow. They do not require the motorist to change lanes. So as you can see, both of these operations had an adverse effect on one another. Of course, the sweeping operation, sending traffic around them, trying to get that motorist trying to get that connector, were starting to drive into the gore closure. Now the sweeping operation has moved onto the right shoulder. They are going to be moving pretty much directly across from the gore closure, And the motorists passing by the gore closure are reacting to their arrow moving onto the shoulder where the sweeping operation is going to be. So you can see from these scenarios there was two issues at work here. It would have been better for the sweeping operation to see up ahead that they were having an adverse effect on the stationary closure. They should have picked up prior to that, deadheaded around that area. And as far as the gore closure, the stationary closure, if they need to have some kind of message going on their FAS, it could have been the caution, the 4-way, instead of a double arrow. You don't want to be using the arrow. Picking up litter and debris. So what we're talking about here is in medians where there's no barrier, please be aware that traffic could come at you from either direction. Protective vehicles may be necessary at both ends of the work area. Do not overfill bags. We do not want to put any kind of needles or sharp objects in bags. Needles only go in sharps containers. If you come across a needle and you don't have a sharps container, please contact somebody to bring you one, or just leave it there. You can mark it with a cone to come back later, but by all means do not take that needle and place it in any other type of container other than a sharps container. We've had employees think they're doing a good deed and put it in a Coke can and then put it in the bed of their truck to take it back to the yard, and they forget. And then, of course, you know what happens when people go around collecting cans. So it just sets up a bad situation. All right, do not place a needle in any other container other than a sharps container. We don't want to place a lot of heavy items in a bag. We cannot see through the bag. They're either orange or white. They're usually placed there by Adopt a Highway or special programs, and then we have to pick up the bags. We don't know what's in the bags. We can't see, and we didn't fill those bags. So it might look light because it doesn't look like there's a lot of stuff in it, but you go to pick it up and then you hurt your back because it was loaded with concrete chunks. So we do ask that those large items just be stacked next to the bags wherever the pickup area is. We want those bags placed in a safe area for pickup. No bags are to be left in gore areas. We don't want bags placed in areas that have that are a narrow shoulder. Any area that's difficult to get in and out of. It's difficult to accelerate out of. Always face traffic or use lookouts when you're picking up litter and debris. So removing debris from lanes, this policy holds true actually for any time you're going to go out into live lanes. You have two choices. You wait for a natural or you use a CHP brake. A natural brake in traffic is defined as the ability to walk out to the object, pick it up, and walk back to the shoulder. Key word there you can see is walk. If you have to run, it does not count as a natural. You need to have a sight distance of at least 500 feet in both directions and continuously facing traffic or using a lookout. If you work in a rural area, by all means, you're going to have these occurrences, of course. But for those of us who are in metropolitan urban areas, not so much. You're going to be really looking to use the CHP traffic brakes. Don't risk it. You want to remain in the vehicle until the brake approaches and always face traffic when you're out of your vehicle. If you're parked in an area where you can't see when the brake starts, advise dispatch or TMC. They'll let the officer know so the officer can advise when your brake has started. It's also recommended that you use your vehicle as a barrier between the brake and yourself. So you might want to drive it out. Let's say you're picking up a ladder in the number 3 lane, and there's 8 lanes. You might want to drive your vehicle out there to place between yourself and the brake. That way it gives you some added protection, and you can just place the ladder right there in your vehicle. Just a suggestion. All right, so night work. A lot of us, we're going to work at night at some time or another. We do have a few crews statewide that are on permanent nights. The rest of us are responding to call outs, or we're on a storm shift, so we're not used to it. We're used to working during the day, so when you're working out at night, extra caution is necessary. Of course, you shall wear your ANSI Class 3 garments, and the main difference between a Class 2 and a Class 3 is Class 3 has sleeves. Class 2 does not. So we have the Class 2 vests still without sleeves. We also have the Class 3 vest that has sleeves. Our parkas, bombers, and rain jackets and hoodies are all Class 3 ANSI compliant high visibility garments. So we have the short sleeve shirts, we have the long sleeve shirts. Those are ANSI 3 compliant as well. We have the new jeans with the reflective striping on them. Those are not considered the ANSI Class 3 compliant. Those are just added visibility for you. Some supervisors still require the Type E pants. Those are the high-vis yellow-green pants with the reflective striping on them. Those combined with a Class 2 top offer Class 3 compliance. So if your supervisor requires you to wear those, then you shall wear them. It's above and beyond the requirement, which of course is allowed when it enhances safety. Otherwise, you're fine with a ANSI compliant Class 3 top. Sufficient light should be provided. The headlights on your vehicle are not considered sufficient light. You need to have light that actually shines on the surface that you're working. Light plants, floodlights, work lights. We have different things that could be added to our vehicle on a permanent basis, but need the approval of the shop to do so. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We want to make sure that we prevent glare to approaching traffic. A lot of people now are using those balloon lights. Very effective. If you have the ability to use those, to acquire those, great. Otherwise, most of us don't have light plants anymore. We lost those in the fleet reductions. You can rent them, but the balloon light and a generator easily purchased using your Cal card. So, and they aren't considered fleet. So very easy to store and to carry around with you out to your night closures. Signs and cones shall be reflectorized when working at night. Of course, the cones nowadays already come with the reflective sheeting on them, so you don't have to worry about that. Signs, you have to use the retroreflective signs at night. So in maintenance, it was that we were carrying 2 sets of signs. We had the orange mesh for the day and the retroreflective for the night work. So we have encouraged the districts to go to retroreflective for day and night. Retroreflective signs are allowed to be used during daylight hours, and in most situations, if you notice, far outweigh the effectiveness of an orange mesh sign. Orange mesh doesn't take long for that to fade out, and brand new right out of the box, side by side, a retroreflective is far superior than the orange mesh. So we do still continue to carry both. However, it is recommended, highly suggested, that district maintenance goes to retroreflective day and night. If you are still using orange mesh and you have a daytime closure that may go into evening hours, or you get called out late in the day for an incident that may involve fatalities or hazmat spills. You know you're going to be there for quite some time. It's best to set out those retroreflective during the day, so if you are out there going into evening hours, you don't have to go and change out your signs, therefore reducing your exposure of having to set out signs again. When you check your closures at night, do make sure that the lights are dimmed on your flashing arrow signs and PCMS. Most of them now come equipped with the auto dim feature on them, so they just automatically dim themselves in the night hours. However, it may not be functioning properly, so do check those. So transportation of workers shall be transported in vehicles equipped with seats and seat belts. We do not want our employees riding on the sides or the running boards of vehicles. Used to be a great place to stand if you were going to be teaching someone how to operate equipment such as a mower or backhoe or a loader. However, no longer recommended for obvious reasons. You could fall off and get run over. A lot of our equipment also articulates, so you don't want to be caught there in those pinch points. So workers are not allowed to ride on any place on a vehicle or equipment that was not designed for driving or riding, including the loading sill of a trash compactor. So most of our packers in maintenance that we get, a lot of them still have the handle and the step in the back near the hopper with a driver signal. And traditionally in the past, that was designed for a rider, the person that was getting off, to dump trash into the hopper. No longer allowed. This was a Cal OSHA ruling, primarily intended for the waste industry. There was a couple of incidents where we had the garbage collection operators fall off that step and get run over by a backing trash compactor. So that's no longer allowed. People always ask about the cone trucks because, yes, there are seats and seat belts back there. However, those are not intended for general passenger use. That's designed for slow-moving work zone operations. So, if you work for the Division of Maintenance, at some time or another, you will go through our META facility. That's the Maintenance Equipment Training Academy. So, which is actually located in the Office of Maintenance, Safety, Equipment, and Training, where I am located. So as far as META goes and equipment, that's where we teach our workers and operators basic equipment responsibility and operation. Out in the districts, there's a lot more training that goes on, either offered by our office or people that were trained in the districts by our office. So we do have trainers and qualifiers out in the districts to assist with employees who want to become trained and qualified on the other pieces of equipment. So here is an example of why it's important to learn proper chain down techniques that are taught at our Maintenance Equipment Training Academy. Unfortunately, this loader only had a couple of chains holding it down on its transport trailer, and unfortunately it rolled off when the operator was taking a curvy mountain road. So based on our guidelines, it should have had at least 5 chains on it. So as far as incidents and accidents go, the number one preventable vehicle accident in the department is backing. So it doesn't matter what division or office you work for, This is definitely an issue that we've been dealing with that we'd like to get control of. So there's definitely a potential for serious injury or fatality. Over the years, we have lost employees that were backed over by our own equipment. So we want to try and avoid, if possible, some jobs that we perform. Of course, you can't get away from backing, grinding and paving as an example. You're going to have to do some backing on that. So, but for a lot of the operations, we can plan projects to minimize the need for backing. It's a great discussion topic at safety meetings. However, in situations where we're going to be backing, we want to use a spotter. We want to ensure that the workers on foot are in clear view of those who are operating equipment. So the adage holds true that when you're behind a truck, if you can't see their mirrors, they can't see you. So keep that in mind. You want to make sure that if you are driving a vehicle and you're relying only on your mirrors and you're backing, do not back that vehicle until you have positive contact, visual contact with any workers on foot around the equipment. And if you are on foot, do not place yourself directly behind the backing vehicle. So you want to look at if you have a work zone, an operation going on where you have backing, one person should be designated as a lookout so they can keep everybody's interest in mind when it comes to safety. If you're by yourself, perform a walk around of your vehicle prior to backing. The most common locations where these backing accidents occur are in the maintenance stations and district office parking lots. So be aware. So the equipment that we operate, we don't own. It's purchased by the Division of Equipment through the Department of General Services. And in maintenance, we pay the shop a daily rental rate. So when we enter our labor, equipment, and materials each day into IMMS, that is covering the rental that we use from using our equipment. So because of that, it actually funds the yards to be able to have equipment mechanics. So the Division of Equipment is primarily responsible for all the repairs and servicing of the equipment. So as far as we're concerned, we're basically just responsible for wear items. So wiper blades, bulbs, fuses, and then of course cutting blades on equipment. So on graders, snow plows, mowers, and then of course the brooms on sweepers. So those are a lot of the things that we're going to be responsible for. So when we're working on this equipment, we want to make sure it can't move while we're working on it. So we want to make sure that we shut off the engine, set the parking brake, have the keys in our pocket, chock the wheels if you have anything to chock the wheels, if you don't have wheel chocks. Place a do not operate tag in the ignition switch. I don't know if anybody has those. They do make those for use, but it is perfectly acceptable to write on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, do not operate, and place it in a visible location such as the steering wheel or driver's side windshield. Lower implements to the ground or chain them up before working underneath them. And never get under a vehicle supported only by a jack. So anything that's hydraulic, like your equipment, if you shut it off, it will bleed off. Same with a jack. Eventually that jack will not be able to hold up the vehicle. It's going to start to bleed off, so you need to use jack stands. Do not work under a raised bed unless the safety stand is in place. Do not use your hand to search for any hydraulic leaks. Anything under pressure, hydraulic or pneumatic, if it gets into your system, could cause injury or death. bleed pressure on tanks before opening or working on them. And never reach into operating equipment. Stay clear of moving parts. Another preventable injury in the division of maintenance is employees getting their hands smashed in the tailgates of trucks. So if you have debris and rocks and you forgot to undo your chains back there and you're hauling slide material, you go to dump and now everything's jammed up there in the tailgate, don't try to use your hands to clear it. If you are successful and the tailgate swings free, it's several hundred pounds and it will smash your hand up against the bed of that truck. Use a shovel, digging bar, or piece of wood to remove the material. When working with compressed air, make sure you always wear your safety glasses. Do not point it at yourself or others. It's fine to use for cleaning off equipment. Check hoses regularly for cracks or leaks, preferably before you leave the yard. It's easier to make repairs there than on the side of the freeway. If you work in a yard with a mechanic there, more than likely you have a large compressor that goes on and off all day. Your safety officer will be checking that on their annual inspection. So as far as electrical circuits go, you must be trained and qualified to work on them. And in maintenance, we have several hundred electricians by classification up and down the state. So they're primarily responsible for all the repairs on any electrical circuits that we have out there. So all the lights and CMS signs, closed circuit TV, cameras, etc. So the rest of us happen to accidentally come into contact with it because it's buried below or it's up above. So we're going to talk about that for a few minutes here. So overhead utilities, workers shall not perform any function in proximity to energized high voltage lines unless you're trained to do so, but we don't do that as a general rule. We contract that kind of work out. So our tree crews don't do any kind of line clearance work, etc. So we don't perform any function in proximity to energized high voltage lines. We want to keep a minimum clearance of 3 feet at all times around low voltage lines, so that's less than 600 volts. Downed power lines shall be considered energized. Do not try to move any downed power lines. So any downed lines we consider energized high voltage. So if you come across any downed power lines, you need to contact dispatch and they can have the local utility come out and make sure they are de-energized. We do not hoist over energized lines and always look above before raising a bed or a hopper. We have had people clip low-hanging power lines with raised beds or hoppers of their sweepers. Same holds true if you're operating a boom or a mast or a personnel hoist. So oftentimes in storm events, we have trees come down and oftentimes they'll bring lines down with them. We had a similar incident in District 1 during a storm. We had some trees bring lines down, blocking the highway. We had CHP there, eagerly awaiting our arrival so we could clear the road. But upon arrival, the supervisor noticed that there was lines entangled in the tree and told the CHP that we had to wait for the utility company based on our policy. He said not to worry, those are just phone lines, so get to cutting. But luckily our supervisor held his ground and he did have dispatch contact the local utility who came out, and indeed they were energized high voltage lines. So this policy is intended to keep you safe. That's one of the reasons I have the Chapter 8 booklets the size they are, that you can easily carry them in a vest pocket or the glove box of your vehicle. Bring it out and show the CHP. Our policy is in writing right in there, and it's designed for this purpose, to keep you safe. This chart is in your Chapter 8 books. And if you're needing these booklets, please contact me at the phone number I provided earlier, 916-997-8054. Or you can find me email on Outlook, last name Drum, D-R-U-M, first name Teresa, T-H-E-R-E-S-A. I'd be happy to provide you with those handbooks. So here's a picture here. This is the drillers, and an example, as I mentioned, why you want to always look above before raising a mast, hopper, bed, or hoist. So in this situation, they have to look above and also be concerned with what's below. So now we're going to move on to underground utilities. So before drilling or digging, the area shall be checked for underground utilities. It is the supervisor's responsibility to contact USA, Underground Services Alert, 2 to 14 days prior to the work being done. Also, item of note, Caltrans Electrical does not subscribe to USA. So if you're going to be digging or drilling in the area, Caltrans right away, make sure that the local electrical supervisor or superintendent is notified. They will have their electricians go out and locate any of our utilities in the right-of-way. There's the phone numbers for Northern and Southern California, USA. Also, 811 has been established as a number that you can call from anywhere to get a hold of USA. So this is an older picture, but the only one I have that shows the USA markings. So if you weren't familiar, that's what those are. So in the area that you're going to drill or dig, you mark that area. USA has all the subscribers in the area come out and locate for underground utilities. And if they do have anything in our right-of-way, then they would mark it color-coded with spray paint. As far as ladders go, your supervisor shall inspect them monthly. That's a Cal OSHA requirement. Ladders shall be maintained in good condition. You want to make sure those steps are tight, your hardware is securely attached, you don't have any binding or excess play in the movable parts. You don't want any kind of oily, greasy, slippery material on the steps. Any defective ladders shall be withdrawn from service and tagged until repaired or replaced. So if you're going to replace a ladder, the old one must be destroyed before you throw it away. Metal ladders shall not be used when working on electrical equipment. Always face rungs and use both hands when you're climbing ladders. Confined spaces. So the definition of a confined space is that you can physically enter, it has limited means of entry or exit, and it is not designated for continuous occupancy. So we have a lot of confined spaces in our right-of-way. Some are even in your yards, but there are some examples of a lot of the confined spaces. Now, for those of you who are responsible for checking pump houses during storm events for oil and grease, going in at the street level and performing that is not so much the confined space that we're concerned with as the sump down below. When you take the confined space training, they'll go into greater detail. This is not confined space training, it's just FYI that's provided in Chapter 8. So you shall not enter unless you're trained. You need to know the hazards of a confined space, the operating and rescue procedures. Your air monitoring equipment. You need to know how to calibrate and use your sniffer. All the forms associated with confined space work, and communication is key. Communication before, during, and after a confined space activity. All employees involved with confined space work shall be trained annually. The rest of us will be trained from time to time as it's warranted. So if you're on a crew, like an electrical crew or maybe a plumbing crew, if you still have those out there, bridge crew, culvert crew, you're going to expect to have that training pretty regular, annually. The rest of us, we may not go into confined spaces, but maybe 2 or every 3 years. So we'll just have the training as needed. Of course, once you've had the training and you're going to go in a confined space and you operate that air monitoring equipment, you're not going to enter if the oxygen level is less than 19.5% or greater than 23.5%. The LEL is 10% or greater. Your hydrogen sulfide level is greater than 10 parts per million, and carbon monoxide level greater than 25 parts per million. So, of course, the air monitoring equipment that you purchase and use have to be able to test for these 4 gases with these alarm settings. Trenches and excavations are also confined space, but you also have the hazard of cave-in. You want to review our safe operating practices before you dig, drill, or work near a trench. A supervisor shall inspect the area prior to you working in a confined space or a trench or excavation. So our policy is 5 feet or deeper shall be shored or sloped and have proper means of access. However, there might be situations where you only have a 3-foot trench, and maybe you're going to be crouched down at the bottom working on a pipe. In that situation, if it caved in, you'd be buried, so you would still need shoring or to make sure it is properly sloped. So for that reason, anytime you have a trench or excavation, the supervisor shall inspect the area prior to you working in it. As far as reclaimed water, it's becoming more prevalent statewide, especially in Southern California. But you shall be trained prior to use. We pretty much consider it like working with chemicals. You don't want to drink it. You don't want it splashing in your eyes. You want to make sure you wear your PPE and clean up after use. You want to have clean water and soap at the work site. You want to clean up before eating. You can contact your local supplier or county health department for assistance when it comes to information and training. Your district safety office can help as well. Hazardous substances, it doesn't matter what kind of crew, division, or office you're associated with. As long as you're going to be working out in the Caltrans right-of-way, at one time or another, you could be exposed to hazardous materials. We use it in our jobs, but oftentimes it's also been stashed in our right-of-way or fallen off people's vehicles. I know some districts had a lot of issues with meth lab waste being disposed in our right-of-way. If you ever come across a 5-gallon bucket or a 50-gallon drum that looks like it's been stashed in the landscape, stay clear of that and contact your supervisor. That stuff is lethal. So, any employee handling or exposed to hazmat will be trained on hazards, proper handling, and disposal. Safety data sheets are that has replaced the MSDS. Material safety data sheets are now safety data sheets. That's a result of the GHS, Global Harmonization System. They shall be reviewed and readily available. Chapter 16 of the Caltrans Safety Manual covers the Hazardous Materials Communication Program. That is to be posted at all maintenance stations. and working within railroad right-of-way. Our policy is employees shall not enter upon railroad or trolley right-of-way unless the following occur. We've had permission granted from the rail entity. Our employees are accompanied by a railroad or trolley employee, and Caltrans employees have received a safety briefing from the rail entity. We have training available. Our Division of Rail has put together a lot of good information, so training is available for crews who will be working in railroad right-of-way. So there's lots of resources available to us for safety. Of course, today we covered Chapter 8 of the Maintenance Manual. There is also the Code of Safe Operating Practices. I know different divisions have their own. Departmental Safety Manual. So headquarters safety, they oversee the safety program for the entire department. District and headquarters safety offices and officers are great resources available to you. The Caltrans intranet, as well as the internet, has a lot of great safety information and resources available. Just about any training that you go to, you're going to come away with some great materials. So for those of you who are planning on promoting, all of our exams and interviews are heavy on the safety. So most of the questions, at least for maintenance, come right out of Chapter 8.